Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. By the way, Brian's putting up some new pieces from yesterday. Gerald Lamero is going to be on there on Facebook.com/910WSBA if you didn't get a chance to hear that. And if you missed any pieces over the week, a lot of them are up there. What's the other one we're putting on there also, Brian?
Mr. David Rubin.
David Rubin, who was live from Israel yesterday on the Israeli situation in that part of the world, and his book, Sparks from Zion. He's going to be on there as well. So Facebook.com/910WSBA. With us this morning, a very special guest. He's been a good guest over the years for a lot of time, and he's well-known around the country. He's a columnist. He's also senior fellow in National Security Affairs, Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. And he is Peter Brookes, and he joins us on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good morning.
Speaking of security,
yeah.
Did you see the story the other day about the guy that tried to break into the White House on Monday and was intercepted by the Secret Service?
No, I didn't see that most recent one. I've been kind of involved in the foreign news, but I know we had this in the past.
He apparently was coached by Pete Carroll and trying to get in the White House. I didn't know if you had seen that. I'm sorry. That was
Man,
so.
Gotta let the Super Bowl go.
That was low and cheap. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's.
Well, that's pretty high standard for you.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you to pick on me like that. I just thought you're the kind of guy with a sick sense of humor that would like something like that. And anyway, so hey, great to have you in this morning. Lots going on right now, man, around the world. It's and you've been focused on the Ukraine. I think a lot of people with ISIS happening and the stuff going on with Jordan and so forth haven't been looking as much at the Ukraine, but the Ukraine. Very complicated, yet at the same time, one of the things I know you've been writing has been the idea that we need to do something more. What more do we need to be doing right there right now?
Well, yeah, I've also been working on this ISIS stuff, and I thought that column.
I'm going to get to that too.
Boston Herald.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that this was going to be the story this week because Secretary Kerry's in Europe, the defense ministers are meeting at NATO, the situation in Russia is getting bad, but unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, it was overshadowed by that terrible tragedy with the Jordanian pilot.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I thought this was going to be the story this week, and timing is everything. But it's still going on. It's getting a little news today. Because Kerry is in Kiev, and the defense ministers are meeting, and the situation in the eastern part of Ukraine is not getting any better. The Russians, NATO insists that the Russians are supporting the rebels. They're being called volunteers, which means people, probably Russian soldiers, who knows, maybe they've been discharged, who have gone to Ukraine to fight against the Ukrainian army. And the Ukrainian army isn't much, unfortunately. I mean, the Russians, if they really wanted to, could probably sweep in, as an army itself, could probably sweep into Kiev pretty quickly. But this low-level insurgency continues to go on, supported by the Russians, heavy weapons. The problem is that it's increasingly resulting in the deaths not only of combatants, but of non-combatants. In other words, civilians. I mean, things like, railroad stations and other, civilian targets are being bombarded with artillery, and the number of deaths among civilians is increasing rapidly. I mean, this conflict, I think, has taken more than 5,000 lives already. There's no end in sight, and the administration has been under a lot of pressure from myself and others over time to, at least arm the Ukrainians. I mean, if the president is a constitutional lawyer or a lawyer, when you talk about international law, the United Nations, which I have some issues with, but we all signed up to say that countries have the right of self-defense. I mean, this is widely accepted, and if a country asks for your help, like we're doing in Iraq, for instance, you're allowed to help them against aggression. And in this case, they've decided not to do anything. And as I point out in this column, there's a lot of reasons for that, and including the fact that we've become dependent on Russia for some other issues, such as the Iranian nuclear matters, and even the peace plan out there that anybody's even looking at for Syria, because we don't have a policy in Syria,
right,
is the Russian peace plan. So, I mean, our Russia policy, I like to say it's gone from reset, remember that whole thing with the big red button, to regret. And it's just a mess. So I'm really concerned, and I think that the Europeans are really concerned that they're not getting the type of American leadership that they want for their own security. I mean, under the NATO flag.
Are we ceding our place in the world, and I'm not even sure right now what our place in the world's supposed to be, but I think,
we've past tense in my view.
Yeah. Are we ceding that away, or have we? Apparently, we've already ceded away. Yeah.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's my view, and obviously we can all debate, and it's fair to debate, and thankfully we can debate in this country about our role in the world. But I see the president, and as a conservative, I have a lot of problems with the way the president has decided to, I would say, retrench from international events in the world and his focus on issues. But he's getting criticism from the left as well. His people on his side of the aisle about his weak foreign policy. I mean, if you look at the, for instance, of bringing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here to the Congress to give an address, that has a lot of support on the left because they're really worried that the president is going to try to cut a deal with Iran about their nuclear program. He's getting a lot. There are a lot of people on the other side of the aisle that are worried about the war on terror and what we're seeing with ISIL, ISIL, whatever you want to call them. I mean, there's stories today, besides this terrible burning or immolation of this Jordanian pilot, about in Iraq, about ISIS, burying children alive. Going, I don't want to call it genocide because that has a certain definition, but they're going after young males, and they're killing them, and there's stories of them being buried alive. I assume these stories are accurate. I mean, we're dealing with pure evil here, and people don't see the president as stepping up. And one thing is, we all know every group, whether it's an international system or international coalition or a business or a social group, it needs some sort of leadership to move in any sort of direction. And I think the president, my concern is he's not showing the sort of leadership the world has come to expect from the leader of the free world.
One of the problems I have is that we've turned national security into kind of a coffee klatch kind of discussion that doesn't really involve real people. The president said the other day on the war with radical Islam, and everybody says, well, you're not saying radical Islam. He said, I don't quibble with labels. I think we do ourselves a disservice in this fight if we are not taking into account the fact that overwhelming majority of Muslims reject this ideology. I mean, we're so busy trying to be politically correct, and we're so busy trying to say, I think it goes without saying that we obviously recognize there are people in this world who are not violent, and yet at the same time, there are people that used and have hijacked that very religion to become violent. And so the president quibbles, it seems to me, with parsing this stuff as opposed to trying to put some policy out there to solve it. How
about a little clarity?
Yeah.
How about a little bit of resolve? I mean, this is something I think. This is. I was on CNN the other night talking about this, debating somebody. Yeah. And they talked about how, Bush didn't call it radical Islam either. I said, yeah, but that was in the days after 9/11, and we were only talking about Al-Qaeda. The situation has gotten worse. It's proliferated. ISIS is planting flags in Yemen. They're planting flags in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Libya. We're dealing with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Boko Haram, the Taliban, ISIS, the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. I mean, people are worried this is getting out of control and that we're in the crosshairs. It's like some people will say, well, the situation we're talking about is that somebody's house in our neighborhood is on fire, but it's not right next door. But I'm telling you, the winds are pushing those embers and flames in our direction. And, if you listen to the people, people should pay a lot of attention to these testimony on Capitol Hill because they get to hear things that they might not hear coming out of the White House and or some of the interviews on television. And there are people who are telling us that supposedly to know that, they're very, very concerned that we're going to have something happen here. And so if you don't deal with that fire in Syria and Iraq, it's going to come here at some point and we're going to pay a price. And the other thing is how much, the president says it's going to take 2 to 3 years to deal with in the Middle East there. Well, that depends on your level of effort, right? If I'm building a stone wall in the backyard, if I put one rock a weekend up, it's going to take a while. If I put 100 rocks up a weekend, it's going to go faster. So your level of effort is going to determine, I think, where you are in degrading and destroying ISIS. And I'm worried that we're just, taking too much time and we're going to have to pay. I'm just kind of wondering what sort of price are we going to have to pay as we let this drag out.
Should we be switching the words around, destroying ISIS and degrading them, because to me, degrading means getting to the root causes and things where they're getting fed, and why you see kids on some of these videos and so we're saying, I had to lit the fire the other day on this Jordanian pilot. I mean, that to me, you have to degrade that along the way, or maybe do it in concert. But the idea is, it doesn't seem to many of us like we're destroying them or going after them. And I understand one of the big problems is we're not fighting a nation state here. We're fighting an ideology and a group of people. And maybe it's not even about Islam anymore. Maybe it's just about a bunch of violent criminals doing stuff. But at the end of the day, it seems like we're not doing enough. And you look at Jordan. I mean, Jordan's throwing everything at it now. They go out and they execute the 2 people they had on death row there and say that's it. And then they go after them full bore, and they've got a pretty good intelligence operation running over there. So why aren't we following their lead a little bit?
Well, I think the president doesn't want to. His entire policy, the way I see it, is that he's trying to build this international coalition of look at the Kurds, for instance. I mean, the Kurds are supposed to be on our side, and they're supposed to be one of the groups that's doing the fighting against ISIS, and we're not providing them with the armaments we need because of the situation with the United States and the Iraqi government. The Iranians are involved in Iraq. They're involved in Syria. I mean, we don't even have a Syria policy. We don't even have a Syria policy. I mean, this civil war's been going on for 4 years, and people feel like if we had tried to deal with this more effectively years ago, ISIS wouldn't be with us here today. Now, we can't go back and run that play again like the
red line
the
stuff,
Seattle Seahawks sort of thing, right? You don't get a chance at that. It's not a dress rehearsal. But the fact of the matter is that I think there's a case to be made for that, and I look at it kind of, Gary, and I hate to say it in medical terms. I'm not a doctor. I'm a doctor academically, but I'm not a doctor medically. The fact is that if it's like any sort of chronic disease. I mean, we're making such great strides today with prevention and early intervention, but we're dealing with a chronic disease here in terms of ISIS, and if we don't get it under control, it may be too late. I'm not saying that ISIS says they're going to take over the White House. I don't see that happening. But what sort of attacks and what sort of other pains are we going to have to endure as we take a low level of effort against this? I mean, you talk to some people. We're talking about, I don't know, 10, an average of, I may not quite right on this. I was speaking with somebody yesterday, and I apologize, I don't have his numbers right in front of me, but they're talking about like 10 airstrikes a day. During the Bosnia campaign, during a Desert Storm, we were running hundreds of sorties a day, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if we don't have the target set. Now, maybe these guys have disappeared into the population, and you don't want to kill civilians, clearly, right?
Right.
So, I mean, maybe there's not good target set. It's not an army in the same sense, and we took 3 months to take, for instance, we took back 3 months to take back Kobani. I mean, the civilians all got out of there. We bombed it, and there's nothing left of the city, basically. So, I mean, this is not easy stuff, but the problem is that I'm wondering about our level of effort. And we're getting others to step up. That's like people yesterday were saying, well, this is going to be a game changer. I'm like, how many times have I heard that about one of these terrible events? Or my other unfavorite word, I love the word, but I hate it, is wake-up call. Every time we have one of these things, somebody says, this is a wake-up call. Wake-up call? How many times have we had? Do you have to be woken up? You can't keep hitting the snooze alarm. You got to get up. And that's a word that's overused. And they're saying, the Arabs, this is going to galvanize the Arab street in the Arab countries, and I hope it's true, but I need that soaring rhetoric to be turned into soaring actions.
Well, but you also look at the UAE stop bombing when this pilot got captured. So, I mean, there's one of the coalition in the White House yesterday was asking about that, and they kind of play it down a little bit.
Well, I think what the backstory is on that is that the UAE, once again, the United States is the indispensable nation. They're saying, hey, if you can't provide us combat search and rescue, we don't want this to happen to our pilots. We're not going to fly. So what they're really doing is putting the pressure on the United States to put our people in further danger to protect UAE pilots. And you can go about that. I think everybody needs to do their fair shake, and I don't think the Arabs are doing enough, quite frankly.
Right.
They've got a lot of money. I mean, remember during Desert Storm, if they weren't going to fight, they paid us for having participated in this sort of, paid for the gas and the bombs and the fuel and all those sort of things. But I'm not saying we're seeing it. I mean, everybody, there's a lot of freeloaders in the international system. If you can get somebody else to do the work for you, whether it's at home or in the international system, people will do it. But, that's where diplomacy and leadership and, negotiations comes in.
Final thought. What do we need to do right now? It seems like around the world we have degraded and destroyed our reputation a little bit as being, if you're going to turn to somebody, you got to turn to the United States. Where do we go from here? What do we need to do to kind of restore that kind of opinion again, or will we ever be able to do that?
Well, I hope, the White House is going to stay with the same leadership, and I don't expect the president to really change the way he deals with international situations. I think it's where the important thing is for Congress to speak up about these matters. I mean, it's a co-equal branch of government. They have a role in foreign policy. They obviously don't have as much say over foreign policy. That tends to be the prerogative of the President of the United States under our Constitution. But they have a role, and I think that they need to speak out if they feel that America. I mean, I clearly do, but if they feel like I do that America needs to play a more central role that will advance and protect our interests.
By the way, on a less serious note, yep. I thought it was a nice gesture the other day, coming back to Super Bowl just for a second, that Tom Brady gave Butler, the guy that intercepted the pass at the end, his Chevy. I thought that was a very nice thing.
Yeah. So,
although he did say the tires were inflated, he took a little air out of them before he gave it to him. But I thought it was still a very nice thing.
It's like Henny Youngman.
I know it's terrible.
Gary Sutton.
But you gotta, every now and then you just gotta hang on for a little bit,
Well, this is pretty serious and in some ways, less than optimistic conversation. So ending it on a high note.
I need to try to find something. I'll tell you what, anymore, it's hard, and I appreciate all the hard work you're doing on it, seriously, and thank you so much for joining us today, Peter. Always a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Peter Brookes with us on the Gary Sutton Show. He is renowned as far as security around the country. Yes, he writes a lot of articles, but he also puts suggestions on what we maybe should be doing. Very clear. You read him a lot in the Boston Herald.